Hello and welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Have you ever wanted to get into a tabletop skirmish game but were concerned about potential barriers to entry? Maybe you were worried about the upfront costs of buying an army. Maybe you didn't fancy the idea of clipping, cleaning and assembling miniatures. Maybe you felt you lacked the skill or time to paint those miniatures. Or maybe you aren't a fan of games with too many rules. Well, let me introduce you to Necromolds Monster Battles, a skirmish game with an awesome 90s aesthetic that will appeal to older gamers, but which is designed to introduce younger or casual gamers to the hobby by using streamlined rules and replacing plastic miniatures with molded Play-Doh monsters. This is a game that I missed on Kickstarter not once, but twice. I was really sleeping on the job there, but as soon as I discovered it, I knew I wanted to feature it on the channel. Fortunately, not long ago I was contacted by the designer Clint Bohati, who wanted to know if I would like a review copy. So here I am, in proud possession of the Necromolds Battle Box starter set, plus the Call to Arms expansion and 2 monster packs. I'm going to be looking at all of this on the channel in different videos, but for today I'm just going to focus on the starter set. Look at this beautiful artwork, the window box showcasing the cool plastic toys inside, the kick-ass fonts, all those crazy characters in masks throwing lightning and exploding all over the place. I was born at the tail end of the 70s, so as a kid I was watching Trapdoor, collecting Garbage Pail Kids, throwing mad balls around and dumping slime on my He-Man figures. This starter set looks like it has been teleported directly out of my childhood through a time portal. This could be a big toy company's new best thing ever.
Kids! Kids! Ah! It's so awesome!
The concept of the game is straightforward enough. A bunch of wizards called necrocasters are creating golems from ancient Necromold spellbooks, and then controlling those abominations with their special caster rings. You take on the role of one such wizard, building an army, literally, and smashing your foes. Also, literally. You don't need to know any more than that to enjoy Necromolds, but in case you are interested, the core set includes a stunning 44-page sourcebook called The Rise of the Necromolds, which proves what a labour of love this game really is. It's packed with backstory, artwork, biographies of notable necrocasters, comic strips, a checklist of the different caster rings, and information for all 16 currently available Necromold golems to help you pick which ones you might want to add to your army. To get started, first unfold the battle map. This is beautifully illustrated, and as a fun bonus, the rules include a Where's Wally style treasure hunt for younger players whose attention may be starting to wander. Can you find all the mud mumps and baked pies? My one issue with this board is that while it is lovely to look at, it isn't what I expect from a battle map. I would have preferred a top-down view of a landscape, something that helped to give more of a sense of location for the skirmish taking place, with less busy artwork that isn't so distracting. My daughter, it should be noted, had a very different take on the board. She really liked it because she said that when you were measuring distances for a route that isn't perfectly straight, you could use the characters on the board art as waypoints. That is something I hadn't considered, but my daughter is considerably smarter than me. Each player now receives 4 command dice. These have custom symbols that match symbols on unit cards and will be used to direct your troops in battle. 6 combat dice. These are custom 8-sided dice used for a classic hits versus shields combat system. 4 gems. These will be used during combat resolution to boost your dice pool. 1 caster ring. There are 2 in the box, each with a different design, a skullworm and a black widow. Other designs are available. 1 distance tool. All measurements in this game are either close, medium or far, with each distance represented by one side of the triangular tool. The tools in the starter set are made of card, but funky plastic upgrades are available as separate purchases. And finally, 1 container of spell clay. A few notes about this stuff. Yes, it's basically Play-Doh. It's a soft, moldable, non-toxic clay containing water, flour, expanding agent and colouring. If it gets too dry, you can add a little water. If it gets too wet, you can add a little flour. If you ever need to replace it, you can use any alternative brand of dough clay. And most importantly, I say this with all the heartfelt sincerity of a father of 2, don't use this stuff on carpets or upholstery. Just don't. Next, you need to create the battlefield. Each player rolls 3 of their combat dice and totals the number of hits. The player with the highest score chooses one piece of terrain and places it anywhere on the board. Players then take it in turns, adding more terrain until there are 3 pieces on the map. There are 6 terrain pieces in total, all beautifully drawn, and while I appreciate their inclusion for making the starter set feel like a complete product, I'm not a huge fan of them. They are perfectly functional, but they are just flat pieces held upright in plastic stands. As a result, some of the taller pieces are a little unstable, and the overall flatness of them means they lack weight and substance. Fortunately, the Call to Arms expansion, which I will be looking at in a future video, has fantastic 3D constructible terrain. It adds more variety and looks so much cooler. And of course, if your kids have some Play-Doh sets and sculpting tools lying around, you could probably create all kinds of castles and battlements for your golems to brawl over. After all, the focus here is very much on playing, on creativity and imagination, doing things your own way and having fun. This will become more evident later on when we consider the many different rules variants that Clint has folded into the design. Having set up the battlefield, each player must build an army. This is handled in a very clever way. There's no points limit, there is a clay limit. Each player has 3.5 ounces of spell clay, and they can use that clay to make as many golems as possible, using any spellbooks they have access to. The core set includes 3 spellbooks: Mudmumps, Grave Ghouls, and the Mighty Insectomite. And that is enough to get started with, but if you find you really enjoy the game, you are going to want more spellbooks very quickly to expand your team building options. With the expansions I have 8 spellbooks, and I still feel like I need more. Ideally, I would like all 16. At the very least, I need a veggie toad in my life. These spellbooks are very clever, as they combine the molds for making the golems and the golem stat cards that you use during the game. And don't worry if 2 players want to use the same golems, as you do get some extra shared play stat cards. Personally, I find these cards easier to use during a game than the spellbooks anyway. To make your golems, grab a ball of your spell clay, drop it into the book, give it a good squish. Hard as you can, you want to make sure you don't have any gaps. And when we open the book, there you have it. Just peel off all of this excess clay. You can dismantle these books if you need to get out bits of clay stuck around the edges. Carefully pull out the golem, and look how cool he is. Then you just have to repeat the process for whichever golems you want until you run out of clay. I should mention, on the box and in the rules it says that if you want to, you can let your golems air dry and then paint them. This feels very much like a suggestion for the younger crowd. The molds are detailed and the resulting golems are good for being Play-Doh creations. There is an impressive amount of character in them, but they aren't the sort of thing I can see miniatures painters working on. I suppose it could be an activity if you have some children who have expressed an interest in painting, but you aren't ready to let them loose on your collection of Citadel miniatures. Anyway, with your armies created, you have to deploy them. Simply line them up on the edge of the map closest to you, making sure they are all touching the green line. Now it's time to fight. The game will proceed in rounds. The first thing to do in each round is determine who goes first. This will normally be the player with the least number of golems on the battlefield. However, in the event both players have the same sized army, they each roll 3 combat dice and total hits to determine who goes first. Next, players simultaneously roll their 4 command dice. These dice have 2 faces with the move icon, 2 faces with the ranged attack icon, 1 face with the magic icon, and 1 face with the wild icon, which can be immediately flipped to any of the other 3 symbols. The rolled symbols are then allocated to your spellbooks. Each spellbook has slots with symbols matching those on the command dice, and you can assign any dice to a matching slot. For example, here we have my favourite unit from the base game, the Grave Ghoul. It has 3 slots. The first is a magic slot. If you allocate a magic dice here, this unit's ranged attacks will change from close range to far range for the remainder of the turn. The second is a movement slot. If you allocate a movement dice here, you can discard it when the unit activates to move it up to a medium distance. The third slot is a ranged attack. If you allocate a ranged attack dice here, you can make a ranged attack with this unit, which will be at close range as standard, but will be at long range if you also allocated a magic dice. Some command slots combine multiple commands. Mudmumps, for example, can either be allocated a ranged attack dice or a second movement dice. If you have a dice you can't assign or don't want to assign, they are discarded. Any magic symbols discarded grant 2 bonus gems. Once dice are allocated, players take turns activating spellbooks. To do this, a player selects a spellbook and then chooses one dice on that book, performing the associated action. If the command slot on the spellbook has a solid frame around it, every golem created from that spellbook can take the action. If the command slot has a jagged, broken edge, only one golem from that spellbook can take the action. Once all the commands have been resolved, the player selects another dice on the same spellbook, then repeats until there are no dice left on that spellbook, at which point the other player takes a turn selecting one of their spellbooks. This continues back and forth until all command dice have been used, at which point the round ends. Assuming the battle isn't over, in other words both players still have golems in play, a new round begins. While some golems have special abilities, some that require magic, some that are passive, for the most part an activation comes down to two things: ranged attacks and moving. To move, simply use the measuring tool to figure out how far you can travel. You can move through friendly monsters, but can't move through enemy monsters or solid terrain. If you come into base contact with an enemy, you end the movement and instantly initiate a round of close combat. Finishing a move in base contact with more than one enemy isn't allowed. To make a ranged attack, you have to have line of sight to the target. You can't shoot through solid terrain or other monsters, but you can shoot over short obstacles. Melee and ranged attacks are resolved in a similar manner. First, the opposed players gather their dice pools. For the attacker, this will be a number of dice equal to their melee attack skill or ranged attack skill. For the defender, this will be a number of dice equal to their defense skill. Starting with the attacker, combatants then have a chance to spend gems to add dice to their pool. To add a dice, you have to spend a number of gems equal to how many dice will be in your pool after you have added the extra dice. You add dice one at a time, paying the new cost each time. So if you would normally roll 2 dice to attack, you can spend 3 gems to add a third dice. If you then wanted to add a fourth dice, it would cost you an additional 4 gems. Next, both players roll the special 8-sided combat dice and total successes. Each dice has one face with 3 hits, 3 faces with 1 hit and 1 shield, 2 faces with 2 shields, and 2 faces with a gem. The attacker is looking for the hit symbol, the defender is looking for the shield symbol. Highest total wins, loser gets, and this is the really fun bit, squashed. Man, that is so satisfying. In the event of a draw in a ranged attack, neither golem gets squashed, but if there is a draw in close combat, both golems get squashed. Double the squishy fun. The final thing to do is collect gems. Both players get 1 gem for each gem symbol they rolled in the attack. Additionally, if a golem was smashed, the controlling player gains bonus gems equal to the number of dice they rolled, which is a nice consolation prize. And that's how the game goes, with players alternating spellbook activations until all command dice have been used, and then starting a fresh round rolling the command dice again. The only objective is total domination, so you are playing to completely table your opponent. It's all very neat, very slick, it all feels well thought out and competently executed. At times the dice combat does feel a bit swingy, with lowly mudmumps sniping mighty insectomites, and it can be frustrating when you don't get the command symbols you need, but there are optional rules for mitigating those rolls, and that's one thing I really admire about Necromolds, how meticulously it has been designed to serve as an entry point to tabletop games while still ensuring an engaging experience for established gamers and opening the floor for people to bring their own ideas into the mix. The rules I have explained so far are for the standard game, but if you are playing with very young children, there are some basic play rules you can use. The big difference here is all golems are treated equally, so they don't have any unique stats, special powers or command slots. A thoughtful change in this version of the rules is that players smash their own monsters when they are defeated, as a way of emotionally balancing the loss. They have been defeated, but they get to do the fun thing. Little details like that are an absolute pleasure to see in a rule set, and the kind of thing that parents of young children would almost certainly be doing anyway. On the flip side, the game also includes advanced play rules that I would recommend players with experience of skirmish games should start using from their second game onwards. These are very small additions to the game that do add significant depth to your strategies, including how you build your army. First of all, if at any time you only have 1 spellbook with active golems on the battlefield, you lose 1 command dice for the rest of the game. Additionally, after rolling command dice at the start of the round, you can discard 1 dice to re-roll any of the remaining dice you would like to, or discard 2 dice to set 1 remaining dice to a face of your choice. Being able to mitigate your command roll in this manner really helps when there is one specific action you desperately need, and it adds a degree of control to the command phase that I particularly enjoy. Another new rule is called Gem Rage. When you attack in close combat, if you roll any gem symbols, instead of collecting the gems, you can reclaim and re-roll those dice at the cost of 1 gem per dice. This action can only be performed once per attack and only when you are the aggressor, but when you roll like I do, it makes a huge difference. Finally, you can introduce support skills. If you look at the stat blocks for the golems, you will notice some of the skills are highlighted in blue. During the game, if 2 golems from different spellbooks are within close distance of each other and they share a highlighted support skill, they will aid each other in combat, allowing the reroll of 1 dice when using that particular skill. This adds a surprising amount of strategy, as you are going to be looking at how different golems synergize when you are creating your team in the first place, and then working out how to move supporting golems in blocks to ensure you always have the edge in combat. I love this, and I think one of the biggest failings in the core set is they don't include any golems that can support each other. Insecta might support in defense, Grave Ghouls support in close combat, and Mud Mumps don't support in anything at all. It feels like something of an oversight that one of the most interesting advanced rules is locked behind the purchase of additional spellbooks. With basic, standard and advanced rules, Necromolds is already doing a lot to open doors, but it goes further. There are comprehensive rules for a solo mode, there are rules for 3 or 4 players, although those require purchases of special upgrade packs and additional accessories, and there is even a section dedicated to variant rules that have been invented by the fan community, including rules for using additional clay to cast spells, such as creating walls or blasting enemies with projectiles. At the back of the rules book there is a space to write your own variants, because this game wants you to create your own rules. It wants you to get involved, to get creative, to build and then destroy, and then build again. It wants you to have fun. And honestly, I find it hard to imagine how anybody could play this game and not have fun. It's so creative, so inventive, so tactile, so engaging, so satisfyingly squishy, so streamlined, and so gleefully silly, but with a real design under it all. A solid framework of rules that work and allow for a suitable level of crunch for those people who demand more from a skirmish game than the ability to squash rival monsters. It's an absolute joy. Throughout this review I have nitpicked a few small details, the design of the battle map, the flat terrain elements, but those are minor points, and for the most part this is a superb product. There is one thing that doesn't appeal to me though. Necromolds involves a blind purchase element. There are 20 different collectible caster rings, each of which is available in a regular or glow-in-the-dark finish. In each monster pack expansion you will get 1 random ring. Additionally, you can buy individual rings in blind bags for $5 each. I have done my fair share of blind purchase collecting in the past. Card games, miniatures games, Lego, and I am certainly not immune to the dopamine hit of opening a baggie without knowing exactly what's inside. However, it is a model that has always concerned me, and I would much rather be able to simply buy what I want for the games I like. Having said that, I do see why the model would be employed for Necromolds. The game has a strong retro 90s aesthetic and toy factor, and blind purchasing does feel like it fits into the overall vibe. This is a game primarily for younger children, and having an accessory in the pocket money price range gives them another way to engage with the hobby, as they build a set and swap doubles with their mates in the playground. And from a business standpoint, it makes sense. Necromolds doesn't demand regular purchases of new miniatures. It doesn't require codexes or rule supplements. You don't need to buy official terrain or branded paints. Sure, there is a core set, a big expansion, 6 monster packs, and packs for upgrading the game from 2 to 4 players, but there comes a point where players are going to have access to all the units in the game and nothing left to buy. Blind bagged, non-essential accessories provide an ongoing revenue stream, and because the rings are all functionally the same, nobody gains an advantage from having rare chasers, and the practice doesn't feel predatory. It feels optional. And with that, I think we are drawing near to the end of this review, so I should sum up my final thoughts. I am a fan of retro gaming. I have a lot of nostalgia for the old games I grew up with, and you will regularly hear me talking about and reviewing the games that were important to me as a child. It is not so common to find a new game that invokes that same sense of nostalgia in me. but here we are. Necromolds feels like something I could have played on one of those long rainy British summertime weekends after a game of Dragon Dice or Space Crusade. Yet, like a timeless classic, it doesn't feel outdated or creaky. It perfectly balances the old and the new, retro aesthetics with modern design and production, accessibility with depth. When my daughter is old, and I'm just a photo in a picture frame in a hazy cloud of memories, when, hopefully, she remembers the fun times we had together throwing dice and plotting each other's downfall, I can imagine Necromolds being one of the games she thinks of fondly. But that is it from me for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to check out Necromolds for yourself, follow the link in the video description below. And as always, if you like the video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really like the video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I will see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.